This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Otelia with tonight's top stories. China marks its National Day with a flag-raising ceremony at Scarborough Shoal, a disputed atoll also claimed by the Philippines and a flashpoint for clashes at sea. And in the global innovation race, Beijing rolls out a new visa to lure foreign tech talent just as the US raises barriers, though some requirements remain vague. Taiwan refuses to give in to Washington's pressure to move half of its chip production stateside, even as it struggles to finalize a tariff deal with the US. And South Korea marked Armed Forces Day with its biggest defense budget hike in 15 years, up 8.2%, following pressure from Washington to pay more to defend itself.
Can we ever expect a female supreme leader to emerge? Many people say it's an impossibility or the people won't accept that. I disagree, humbly.
Also in the bulletin, a discussion between our senior correspondent in Seoul and a North Korean watcher on leader Kim Jong-un's daughter. Is Kim Joo-ae next in line to take over from her father? Chinese Coast Guard have held a National Day flag-raising ceremony in the waters off a disputed reef in the South China Sea. Officers stood in formation on a patrol vessel off the Scarborough Shoal and saluted as the Chinese flag was raised. They vowed to stand guard over the reef that's also claimed by the Philippines, with state media calling the area a front line of China's maritime territories. The disputed atoll has become a major flashpoint between Beijing and Manila in recent years. China declared the area a national nature reserve last month, a move condemned by the Philippines and its allies, including the US. Meantime, thousands of people gathered at Tiananmen Square in the capital, Beijing, to catch the traditional flag-raising ceremony at sunrise. The special administrative regions Hong Kong and Macau also held flag-raising ceremonies at daybreak. Performances, fireworks and other festivities are expected across China to mark the country's 76th birthday. And even out in space, the Shenzhou 20 crew on board China's orbiting space station Tiangong sent their birthday wishes while wearing red jumpers that say, "I love you, China." The so-called taikonauts have spent 5 months in the space station. President Xi Jinping hailed China's modernization in a National Day speech at a reception with hundreds of Chinese and foreign guests last night. He also urged stronger cross-strait cooperation and opposition to what he called separatist activities.
要深化两岸交流合作，坚决反对台独分裂行径和外部势力干涉。
China's National Day is the start of its 8-day Golden Week. It's the country's longest holiday this year that merges the Mid-Autumn Festival break. And businesses are banking on domestic travel within this extended holiday to help boost consumption, as China continues to struggle with lackluster consumer spending.
我特别想去那个故宫，但是没有约上那个门票。
就是像我们在体制内的那么在高校嘛在医院，那么收入相对说来是比较稳定的。但反过来就说，像我的妹妹啊，她们呢是自己自谋职业的，感觉就会有一点压力。
China's new K-visa program takes effect today as Beijing seeks to capitalize on Washington's recent policy change that introduced an expensive charge for prospective skilled workers in the U.S. Now, the program hopes to entice top foreign talents in science and tech to come work in China instead, allowing entry, residence and employment for young graduates without a job offer. Analysts say the move could make China an attractive alternative. But questions remain over the exact requirements for eligible applicants, with no clear definition given for age, education and work experience. Well, the Trump administration's unexpected decision to impose a one-time fee of $100,000 for its H-1B visa has rattled the American tech industry, which widely utilizes the program. The H-1B allows companies to sponsor foreign workers with specialized skills to work in the U.S. for 3 years, with a possible extension to 6. Indian nationals account for nearly 3/4 of the permits allotted via a lottery system each year. And I will be taking a deeper dive into this battle for global talent a little later this hour with Michael Feller. Well, he's the chief strategist at consulting firm Geopolitical Strategy. South Korea appears to have reached an agreement with the United States to ease visa restrictions for its workers. Seoul says that U.S. officials confirmed that South Korean workers can now enter America under a B-1 temporary business visa to set up and maintain equipment. Well, that visa is normally limited to business-related activities, but not hands-on technical work. So the visa itself is not new. What's different now is a clarification that certain skilled tasks are allowed under it for South Korean technicians. Washington has stopped short of announcing any formal policy change, saying legislative constraints limit broader visa reform. Seoul also says a direct hotline will be set up between U.S. immigration authorities and its diplomatic mission in the U.S. Now, this all comes in the wake of that major immigration raid last month at a Hyundai battery plant in Georgia, where hundreds of South Korean workers were detained. That incident drew criticism in South Korea and also raised questions about how U.S. visa policies are applied. South Korean President Lee Jae-myung says that the country's defense spending will rise sharply next year, with planned investments in new technologies to strengthen the military. This comes as President Donald Trump's America First approach raises questions about U.S. commitment to their security alliance. CNA's senior correspondent Lee Myung-suk has more.
In his first address to the military since taking office in June, South Korean President Lee Jae-myung described the alliance with the United States as solid. But he also stressed the need for a self-reliant military that can defend itself from external threats at a ceremony to mark Armed Forces Day on Wednesday.
세계 각지에서 협력과 공동 번영의 동력은 약해지고 갈등과 대립이 격화되는 각자 도생의 시대로 진입하고 있습니다. 대한민국의 평화와 번영을 위해서는 누구에게도 의존할 것이 아니라 우리 스스로의 힘을 더욱 키워야 합니다.
To do that, he said the government would sharply increase its defense spending next year to advance capabilities under a proposal submitted to the National Assembly last month.
내년도 국방 예산을 전년에 대비해 8.2%로 대폭 늘어난 66조 3천억 원으로 편성해서 첨단 무기 체계를 도입하고 게임 체인저가 될 인공지능, 드론, 로봇 등 첨단 기술에 집중 투자할 것입니다.
President Lee also said the government would actively develop its defense industry, known as K-Defense, which has grown rapidly in recent years. South Korea is among the world's 10th largest arms exporters. Mr. Lee, a liberal who has called for engagement with Pyongyang, made no mention of North Korea's missile or nuclear program, except to say that South Korea's spending on defense is 1.4 times more than North Korea's gross domestic product. Analysts say he might have been trying to avoid provoking North Korea amid hopes of a meeting with Kim Jong-un in the near future. Mr. Lee also reaffirmed his support for a long-planned shift in the Combined Defense Command, under which a South Korean general would take the lead with a U.S. deputy. Currently, in the event of war, operational control rests with the U.S. commander of the Combined Forces Command, a system in place since the Korean War. About 28,500 U.S. troops are stationed in South Korea. Reactions are mixed. Supporters say the military is capable of taking command, while critics warn the move could weaken deterrence against nuclear-armed North Korea. Lee Myung-suk, CNA, Seoul.
A Japanese agriculture minister, Shinjiro Koizumi, is widely considered a front-runner in the race to lead the ruling Liberal Democratic Party and succeed Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba. Well, he's seen as a youthful reformist who can bring about change. But campaign gaffes in this election and his previous bid last year threatened to derail his hopes ahead of Saturday's vote. CNA's senior correspondent, Michio Ishida, with this report.
44-year-old Shinjiro Koizumi is the youngest of the 5 candidates in the Liberal Democratic Party's presidential election. The son of popular former Prime Minister Shinjiro Koizumi, he was elected to parliament in 2009, taking over his father's lower house seat in Yokosuka, Kanagawa Prefecture. He was appointed Environment Minister from 2019 to 2021 and made his first bid for party president last year, finishing 3rd out of 9 contenders, despite being an early favorite. His momentum slowed after he gave public comments that were seen to reflect a lack of experience, such as on the issue of Japanese nationals abducted by North Korea in the past. During a debate here at the National Press Club last year, candidates directed questions at Mr. Koizumi, who they thought was their biggest rival. Then, political observers said he failed to impress. At this year's debate, he was once again the target of questions, at least in the early part of the debate. This time, journalists accused him of sticking to notes prepared by his team. In the latest gaffe, his campaign team tried to flood a popular streaming platform with positive comments about him and criticism of other candidates. Mr. Koizumi apologized, saying he was unaware of the matter.
最終的に起こってしまったことの責任というのは私にありますので、ご批判はしっかりと私がお受けしたいと思います。
The fallout has raised concern within his camp over potential backlash from party members who have voting rights and the public, which already distrusts the LDP. Prior to this, Mr. Koizumi's reformist image won him support. After being named Agriculture Minister in May, he introduced bold changes to Japan's tightly controlled rice market, releasing rice reserves to drive down soaring prices, though the effect was short-lived.
農政は変わるのもスピードかかりますし、お米は基本的には1年1作ですから、そういった中で急激に変わっていくということは現場の方も求めていない面があることも事実です。ですので今しっかり米の価格を安定化させる、そういったことで努力をしつつ、令和9年に向けて米政策の転換に向けて現場とのコミュニケーションもしっかりしながら前に進めていく。
Once an advocate for policy changes to allow married couples to keep separate surnames, Mr. Koizumi has toned down some of his more progressive views in his campaign, in what political watchers say is a bid to broaden his support base. While he won the most votes from LDP lawmakers last year, he trailed behind rival Sanae Takaichi among rank-and-file members. Some say he is seeking to win over Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba's backers in a competitive race by vowing to carry out part of his legacy, such as setting up a disaster mitigation agency. Michio Ishida, CNA, Tokyo.
Coming up next on East Asia Tonight, a central bank survey shows Japan's export-reliant economy weathering the hit from US tariffs for now. Plus, the Australian Prime Minister urges China to resume iron ore imports after reported trade disruption. Hello again, you're watching East Asia Tonight, and it is now time for your business update with Roland Lim. So, Roland, we're talking about trade deal negotiations between Taiwan and the U.S. becoming more complicated. What's that all about?
Yes, the island is pushing back against Washington's proposal to produce more chips on U.S. soil. Now, Taiwan says it will not agree to making 50% of its semiconductors in the U.S., a firm rejection from the island as Washington piles the pressure on Taipei to produce more chips on U.S. soil. U.S. Secretary of Commerce Howard Lutnick suggested that Taiwan and the U.S. have a 50-50 split in chip production. But Taiwan's Vice Premier Deng Liqian, the island's lead negotiator, firmly clarified that this was the U.S.'s idea and that the negotiating team has never made such a commitment. Taiwan is struggling to finalize a tariff deal with Washington after President Trump's administration imposed a temporary 20% levy that has alarmed Taiwanese manufacturers. Now, Ms. Zheng has also said that negotiations with the U.S. over the tariffs has made some progress. More than 70% of Taiwan's exports to U.S. are on infocom technology, including chips. Taiwan has committed to increasing investments in the U.S. to buy more U.S. energy and to increase its defense spending to more than 3% of its GDP in a bid to avoid tariffs. Remember, Taiwan produces more than half of the world's semiconductors, with nearly all of them high-end ones. Investor sentiment across Asia-Pacific remains cautious as the U.S. government began shutting down. In Japan, the tech-focused Nikkei ending at a 3-week low of about 1%, while the broader Topics Index lost 1.4%. Investors booked profits selling stocks that rose the most in the recent rally. Tokyo Electron fell 2%, and the tech startup, investor startup that is, SoftBank Group, lost 2.4%, becoming the biggest drags on the Nikkei. As for the rest of Asia, AI theme is boosting buying appetite in Taiwan. The Taiwan weighted index powering on with more than a 1% gain. Investors also mulling over South Korea that showed that rising demand for AI-linked chips lifted South Korean exports to 12.7% on year in September. And that's also beating estimates. Imports also increased 8.2% on year, also above expectations. The flight to safety has also given a lift to some Asian currencies as the greenback eases. The US dollar index is lower by 0.1%, 97.68. A government shutdown could disrupt the release of a key jobs report this week, which could leave the US Fed flying blind in its next policy meeting. Meanwhile, the Korean won is steady against the greenback, 1,404.90 to the dollar. And here in Singapore, the Sing dollar is flat against the greenback. Threats of upheaval and uncertainty pushing gold to a new all-time high. It is currently trading at $3,888 per ounce. Sentiment among Japan's biggest manufacturers improved for a second straight quarter, according to a closely watched Bank of Japan survey. The quarterly Tankan survey showed the outlook among major manufacturers. The key so-called diffusion index rose 1 point to plus 14 from the findings in June. The relative optimism reflects some relief over an agreement on tariffs with the U.S. reached back in July. The findings could influence an upcoming decision by the Bank of Japan on interest rates. The BOJ has kept rates near zero for years to help stimulate consumer spending and business investment and to counter weak demand that has led to deflation. But prices have risen above the central bank's target range of about 2%. Analysts expect the Bank of Japan to raise its benchmark rate soon, but it's unclear if it will do so in the next meeting later this month or even later on. Japan's Mitsubishi UFJ Financial Group is reportedly in talks to buy a stake in an Indian non-banking finance company, marking the latest move by a Japanese financial institution to acquire a stake in an Indian firm. This as Japan's biggest banks seeks investment overseas amid a shrinking domestic market and years of rock-bottom interest rates. MUFG is looking to acquire a 20% stake in Shriram Finance for $2.61 billion. The investment will be through a primary issuance by preferential allotment and will not entail any secondary sale of shares, according to the Economic Times. This follows Sumitomo Mitsui Financial Group looking to hold a 24.2% stake in Mumbai-based Yes Bank. Shriram Finance shares rising 3.5% following the report. It's closing out the day 4.8 in the green. The Australian Prime Minister is concerned over China banning imports of iron ore from global mining giant BHP. Anthony Albanese said that the measures were disappointing, but expressed hope that they would be short-term.
I want to see Australian iron ore be able to be exported into China without hindrance. That is important. It makes a major contribution to China's economy, but also to Australia's.
Beijing's state iron ore buyer has reportedly told steelmakers to pause imports of BHP ore amid hardball negotiations over the price of the crucial resource. The move risks upending one of the mining giant's most important trading partnerships and threatens a major source of royalty revenue for the Albanese government. Australia is the world's largest exporter of iron ore and China its top consumer. Treasurer Jim Chalmers says he would arrange a meeting with BHP Chief Executive Mike Henry to discuss the Chinese trade. The blockade fanning bad memories of the last trade conflict between the two countries. Shares of BHP ending lower by 2.5% in Sydney and the broader benchmark also pulling back. Some 2 years after Singapore Central Bank set out its requirements for stablecoin users, the city-state's move is starting to bear fruit. The recently passed Genius Act in the US has also added fresh fuel to global stablecoin ambitions. And San Jose headquartered crypto exchange OKX is making its move, launching its first stablecoin scan-to-pay service. That's called OKX Pay in Singapore. CNA's Elizabeth Neo spoke with Gracie Lin, CEO of OKX Singapore, on the developments.
MAS was ahead of its time in pushing out stablecoin regulation guidelines ahead of their global peers. But what we are seeing now is actually really encouraging signs that global standards are starting to come down. Across the major markets, regulators are thinking about what they want to put in place to ensure that stablecoin development continues in a sustainable, responsible way, while still ensuring that it can bring the type of utility to payments, to FX conversion, to cross-border trade settlement, all of these good things, while making sure that people who interact with stablecoin are going to be protected. And that's why I feel like there's been this big global push towards high-quality asset-backed stablecoin.
So there is an extra boost from the US's Genius Act. Mm-hmm. And so when we look at the global stablecoin market, how do you see, this act kind of reshaping it? What does this mean for exchanges like OKX? And do you think you could see OKX adjusting its USD stablecoin rails or, issue partnerships for US issuers? I mean, and how will all of that action kind of spill over to liquidity for, say, the Singapore market, for one?
The US regulators getting into this has been obviously a big boost to US dollar stablecoins, but honestly, US dollar stablecoins were already on the rise before. So what I think is really important about the Act is that it now sets a very, very clear standard, which is going to be adopted globally because it's the US, a very clear global standard then on what type of stablecoins we should be looking at. It's got to be high quality, it's got to be fully asset-backed. So that clarity is good for all players, including ourselves. And then now we know which partners to work with. Now we know how to integrate that into the service offering for our users.
With further monetary easing expected, how do you see global monetary policy kind of shaping liquidity, risk asset as well in crypto markets, and what kind of impact do you think we could see?
Stablecoins again are at the core of that, right? Because, well, in the past, generally digital assets didn't really move in line with monetary policy. But now, because US dollar stablecoins are, again, kind of the backbone, you may say, right, of that bridge between digital assets and traditional finance. So when the US, when the Federal Reserve decides what they want to do with interest rates, it does have that link now to digital assets because your big US dollar stablecoins then start to move in tandem, and that obviously will have an impact on the rest of the digital asset space. Of course, there are other factors at play, both macro and as well as project specific, but then that's how then monetary policy, US monetary policy in particular, is then having that transmission channel to digital assets.
And that'll do it for Business News. Oteli.
Thanks so very much for that report. Roland? And moving on to our next story, South Korean airport workers nationwide have gone on strike. More than 2,000 unionized workers across the country's 15 airports have stopped work to seek better pay, more rest days, and a safer working environment. A union representative says no end date has been set for work stoppage, which comes at a peak period for domestic travel. Many South Koreans will be taking trips for Chuseok, the country's Thanksgiving holiday. But airport authorities say disruptions to flights will be limited, as workers in charge of security did not take part in the strike. And those involved are in charge of facility maintenance, including cleaners and staff who arrange carts and manage parking lots. Coming up next on East Asia Tonight, will a new Chinese visa program targeting global talent give Beijing the upper hand in its tech rivalry with Washington? Plus, the Philippines declares a state of calamity in parts of its central regions after a powerful earthquake struck Cebu province. Hello there, you're watching East Asia Tonight, and here are the headlines we're following. China holds a National Day flag-raising ceremony in waters off the disputed Scarborough Shoal. The Chinese Coast Guard vowing to stand guard over the atoll, an area that's also claimed by the Philippines. Taiwan refuses to give in to Washington's pressure to move half of its chip production stateside, even as it struggles to finalize a tariff deal with the US. And China launches a new K-visa program to lure global tech talent as the U.S. raises its own barriers. Well, the move comes amid Washington's hiking of fees for H-1B visas to $100,000 per year, potentially deterring companies from using the scheme to bring in foreign workers. Now, here is a recap. China's K-visa, a contrast to tightening skilled worker visa rules in the U.S., allows foreigners to live and find work in China without being tied to an initial job offer. But details remain vague, with requirements on age, education, and work experience unclear. Plus, there is no word yet on whether it includes permanent residency pathways, family sponsorship, or long-term financial incentives. Well, to help us unpack all of this, we have Michael Feller, Chief Strategist at Geopolitical Strategy, speaking to us from Melbourne. Well, thanks, Michael, for joining us this evening. First up, let's just talk about the timing. You have described this new Chinese visa as exquisite in a CNA commentary. Just can you elaborate a little bit more on that, and what do you think Beijing is trying to signal with this move right now?
Yes, thank you. Exquisitely timed, certainly. Whether it's exquisite in reality, we'll only know, and I suspect that's why we don't have too much information on the number of visas available, because essentially Beijing wants to test this out. They want to know whether there's going to be sufficient demand for the visas, and they also want to know what the reaction is going to be in the domestic market. And so far, it doesn't look like it's been incredibly positive from China's netizens.
That's right, Michael, because, China, as we all know, they're already producing vast numbers of engineers and tech graduates every year, and unemployment itself is an issue. So then what you mentioned that Beijing wants to test this out, but why is there to need to launch a program like this?
So it signals that Beijing is serious about being a global tech leader, and I think it was coincidental that Washington decided to change the fee of its H-1B visas to $100,000. But certainly China wants to signal that it's not just an East Asian player in cutting-edge technology, but a global player. And by welcoming in global talent to help its enterprises, that's quite a powerful message. Whether or not we see hundreds, thousands, or dozens of high-tech workers coming through this scheme is an open question. There's going to be a whole matter of other factors which will determine how successful it is, including whether there'll be jobs available in English. So workers from India, for instance, not too many of them would either have the requisite Mandarin or necessarily be willing to take jobs in a Mandarin workplace. So there's a few other factors that need to be ironed out here.
So, yeah, so Michael, you're saying this is sort of like a test bed, seeing how the take-up rate is going to be like. But tell us, how does working in China's tech sector actually compare to Silicon Valley?
Well, for one thing, Silicon Valley has notoriously long hours, as any high-tech environment does, but nothing compared to China's so-called 996 culture, where you work from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. 6 days a week, as Jack Ma from Alibaba famously told his workers to expect. There are hard-working tech workers, and for the right price, people will be willing to work those hours. But certainly we're talking about an incredibly different work culture to Silicon Valley, which has its roots in, California's counterculture ultimately. So how attractive China will be to global talent, it's up in the air. That said, China does have a relatively, not in terms of percentage, but a relatively large in absolute terms foreign workforce. You only need to go to the largest cities like Shenzhen and Shanghai to see how many expats there are, and it could be essentially just another pathway to those kinds of jobs. But again, until Beijing releases more details or more policy guidance, we can only really guess at what the intentions are.
So aside from the 996 culture, which I'm sure a bulk of these potential young grads could be coming from India, probably no stranger to all these long hours as well. But that sort of has long dominated the US H-1B pool. But political tensions with Beijing, right now seems to be improving. And do you think that China is ready or even willing to welcome large numbers of Indian tech workers?
So the definition of large is going to be the $1 trillion question here. The number of jobs which would be suitable for foreign workers, presumably working in English, coding in English, assuming that these are going to be largely IT jobs. We don't really know how many jobs there are of that nature. I wouldn't say it's in the millions. It would be in the tens of thousands, if anything. But certainly there'll be Indian workers. We're talking about huge pools of people here who'll be attracted to those positions. But the critical question here is all that ancillary stuff that goes with expat or foreign employment. It's one thing to go to China and look for a job. It's another thing to find accommodation, find schooling for your children if you're coming with your family. These things which are quite straightforward for an Indian tech worker in California, for instance. Same English language, similar common law rules, expectations, really. But, going to China is a whole different kettle of fish. And there are many Indians who've worked in China in the past, but as you said, relations have been fairly frosty in the last 10 or so years. So whilst they are improving in the last few months, it remains to be seen how welcoming Chinese people will be to Indian tech graduates, at least outside of the major cities like Shanghai and Beijing, which are fairly cosmopolitan and have fairly global workforces already.
So, Michael, let's just say if China, if it can attract even a fraction of the foreign STEM talent, how much do you think that could shift in its position in terms of its technical rivalry with the US?
So they only really need a sliver of the right talent to make a key difference here, which is why this K visa is quite interesting. It doesn't necessarily need huge numbers of people coming through. It just needs the right types of people coming through. And if this K visa is enough to bring even just a few hundred of the top AI talent out of India who would have been going to Silicon Valley at one point, that might be all that it takes. Already, China and the United States are so close at the cutting edge. And in many respects, China has already eclipsed the United States with its domestic workforce. So, yeah, it's a really interesting question. I suppose it all boils down to who in the global talent pool is interested in considering a career in China as opposed to your usual destinations in the US or Europe.
Oh, interesting you've pointed that out, that perhaps just a few hundred will make a difference. Well, thank you so much for your insights. Great discussion there, Michael Feller, Chief Strategist at Geopolitical Strategy. Now, in other news, at least 69 people have died after a powerful earthquake rattled central Philippines. Officials warn the death toll could rise further amid an ongoing search for survivors. More than 150 others are injured. Well, the quake struck just before 10 p.m. local time on Tuesday off the northern end of Cebu. Strong tremors sent people dashing out into streets, causing power outages in some areas. Tens of thousands have been forced to evacuate. Cebu province has been placed under a state of calamity, and rescuers say debris from collapsed buildings are obstructing search efforts in rural areas. Officials from the Philippine Coast Guard are also rushing to deliver aid and medical supplies. President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. has vowed immediate relief and rehabilitation for the affected communities. Meantime, hospitals in Bogo City are overwhelmed, with scores of patients being treated in makeshift tents due to fears of potential aftershocks. The quake was one of the most powerful to hit the central region in more than a decade. The country's meteorological agency has since lifted a tsunami warning, but urged residents to stay indoors. Meantime, a 6.0 magnitude earthquake has also rattled nearby Indonesia. It struck late yesterday, close to midnight local time, some 150 kilometers east of Surabaya, the nation's second largest city. The jolt was felt most prominently around the town of Sidoarjo in East Java. Authorities say that no casualties have been reported yet. Now, the quake in the town of Sidoarjo reportedly complicating rescue efforts elsewhere in East Java. Emergency personnel are racing against time to save scores of students still trapped underneath a collapsed boarding school as search operations extend into a third day. Authorities say the building's foundational pillars gave way when unauthorized construction work was taking place on a higher floor. Officials estimate 91 people remain buried, with at least half a dozen believed to be alive. Recovery now focused on manually digging holes to provide survivors with food and water. At least 3 people have been confirmed dead and about 100 others wounded, some with critical injuries. Anxious parents awaiting news of their children are growing desperate as a 72-hour golden window for finding survivors nears its end.
Puingnya diambil ya secepatnya. Itu kan banyak dari wali santri yang mau kerja. Tapi sampai sekarang belum ada titik temu antara wali santri sama Basarnas. Hanya ke pimpinan yang memutuskan itu.
Coming up on East Asia tonight, Singapore's defense minister opens the Milken Asia summit with a cautionary speech about an increasingly fragmented world. Singapore's defense minister delivered a cautionary speech today as he opened the Milken Asia summit in the Chan Chun Sing called on business leaders to step up and prevent the global economy from sliding further in an already fragmented world. CNA's Aslam Shah with the story.
Singapore's Defence Minister Chan Chun Sing opened this year's summit with a stark reminder of what happens when societies turn inward. He said the current global economic challenges are similar to events 100 years ago during the Great Depression. Now, trade flows dwindle in the face of retaliatory measures and overall growth faltered. But corporate leaders can reverse that trend.
Governments can set policies, but markets, industries and enterprise will shape the outcome. There is room for all the leaders in this room because you command the resources and you have the ideas to take us to a better place. none of us in this room should be a bystander to change, but instead we can be the architects of change.
Pushing for new models of collaboration is one way they can effect change.
Your voices, your desire for greater global collaboration, greater integration, fresh set of rules to guide the new economy, your voices must be heard in your respective countries at the political level. You must give confidence to your own leaders that this is what the business community and the market desire.
He also outlined Singapore's response to the current uncertain global environment. This includes ensuring there is political stability to have consistent policies and forging new partnerships, not just with countries, but with companies.
Singapore will continue to double down on our investment in our people. Nowadays in the world, we need to invest in the next 50 years beyond the schools. Because whatever we learn in the school is but a foundation. Whoever in the world that can continue to invest in its people beyond its school years and keep its people always at the cutting edge of technology, ideas, will be the winner in the new uncertain world.
This, he adds, will form the basis of how Singapore can continue to be cohesive and confident in the way it approaches the world's challenges.
Well, among those challenges is the global energy transition. It's at a pivotal crossroads with governments re-evaluating their climate policies and putting the focus on affordability and economic growth alongside sustainability. Now, my colleague Rani Samtani spoke with Wee Yi Chu, the CEO of Climate Impact X, at the summit on how governments in Asia are balancing these conflicting demands.
The four main stakeholders today are governments, shareholders, investors, consumers and customers, and financial institutions. And all of these have different approaches, but they all need to come together and really make it work. And I would say that right now, the will to get this done is very, very high, because I think we've all recognized that we've busted past the 1.5. I mean, there's just nowhere that, says we're actually close to 1.5. And so countries that are very impacted potentially by climate change are now sort of rallying together and saying, well, we really need to get together globally and solve this problem. Part of the issue, even though with the best efforts, is there's a lot going on at the moment, right? There's a lot of geopolitical volatility. There's a lot of economic uncertainty. And so I think this plays into the decision-making of all the four stakeholders. We talk about, let's say in the region, every country is trying to balance economic growth with the cost of sustainability. And I think there are still ways that we can mobilize capital, but it would need all four constituencies to come together to really act together. And we must remember, Asia is not homogeneous, right? We're made up of many, many countries, and each country has its own cadence and speed of trying to enact and putting down regulations that make and mobilize capital from developed countries to developing countries.
I want to look at the role of AI. Do you think this is an impediment or a catalyst for sustainability?
It is. AI is so polarizing in the climate space, really. But it is, again, part of this economic growth discussion and corporate growth discussion. AI in itself, it's obviously sort of the bad boy, that's sort of causing all the data centers to, explode in growth in a good way. But it also means that it needs a lot of power and a lot of water to sustain the growth. And but having said that, I think that AI, on the flip side of that, is a huge enabler. I mean, it's not just about sustainability and it's not just about climate, as in trying to get AI to enable some of the tools to facilitate that, but it's also a globally sort of recognized tool to help corporates, be more efficient, just get up to speed. In the climate world, I think it's still I feel it's still underutilized. I think AI could have a lot of adaptability into understanding and modeling, for example, for climate. In understanding and modeling carbon projects, we have very unique technical characteristics. And so sometimes when you see the thousands of projects out there, it's quite bewildering, right? So how does AI then help, see through some of the good projects that corporates might want to invest in, et cetera, et cetera?
A North Korean leader, Kim Jong-un's first visit to China in 6 years, has been overshadowed by the presence of his daughter, Kim Joo-ae. CNA's senior correspondent Lim Yeon-suk spoke to Lee Sung-yoon, who's been studying North Korea's ruling family, to find out more about the girl believed to be Kim's designated successor.
The daughter's international debut was in November, I think November 18, 2022, at a very wholesome family outing, an intercontinental ballistic missile launch. It caught everyone's attention because it was the very first time that the North Korean state media revealed to the world that this cute little girl is indeed the Supreme Leader's daughter. I believe, not including the recent trip by the Kim family to Beijing via train, that the daughter has been shown publicly almost 30 times.
In your book, you have a book called The Sister, titled The Sister, and there you wrote that Kim Yo-jong was her father, the late Kim Jong-il's favorite, and yet she was not named the successor because she was a female.
Both North Korea and South Korea are patriarchal, Confucian cultures where male dominance has been the norm over the centuries and millennia. Can we ever expect a female supreme leader to emerge? Many people say it's an impossibility or the people won't accept that. I disagree humbly, because what supersedes such cultural norms and biases is that the supreme leader must be a family member, a direct line, bloodline family member of the state founder, Kim Il-sung. So Kim Yo-jong, Kim Jong-un's sister, is qualified, if you will, to emerge as the next and the first female supreme leader if Kim Jong-un were to exit the political stage today or tomorrow.
Right, because I was just going to ask you, because you seem very confident in a way that she is going to be the next in line. For now. So what kind of a message do you think that Kim Jong-un is trying to send by bringing her out and taking her to Beijing?
In my view, Kim Jong-un has absolutely nothing to lose by doing this, being frequently seen with his cute daughter in public, and everything to gain. For example, he's projecting to Washington, D.C. and other adversaries, perhaps, the basic message: hello, Mr. Trump, Mr. Biden, or President Lee in South Korea, or whoever might be the next prime minister in Japan. Hello, you will be forgotten in 4 or 5 years. Whereas leaders elected in a democracy, they face this enormous time pressure to chalk up a legacy, to score a policy victory within their term limit. There's sort of a psychological pressure that's at play. It's not just softening up Kim Jong-un's image. It's more instilling in Washington, D.C., in Seoul, and other capitals around the world, the notion that, yes, Kim Jong-un is a loving dad, but Kim Jong-un is also the leader of a country that operates more like a dynasty than a democracy. So they have all the time in the world, and eventually you'll have to accept us as a de facto nuclear weapon state and negotiate from a position of relative weakness, not strength, because you have to deal with us and our nukes.
Well, if Kim Joo-ae does follow in the footsteps of her father to become the leader of North Korea, she will just be the latest in a long line of women who became leaders and had a famous father. Is there really no other way for women in Asia to rise to power without a powerful family? CNA correspondent found an exception. More on My Father's Daughter tonight at these times. And I will also be hearing more from CNA correspondents Saksitsa Sombat in Thailand and Afifa Arifin in Malaysia on female leaders from powerful political dynasties in Southeast Asia. You can catch them on Asia Tonight at 8 p.m. Singapore, Hong Kong time. Now, it looks like Russia is putting on the largest North Korean art exhibition ever held abroad in a public display of deepening ties between Moscow and Pyongyang. The exhibit features more than 100 works, from smiling Russian and North Korean troops celebrating victory in Kursk to scenes of missile launches and battles from the Korean War. It reflects a shift. What was once a secret military partnership is now being celebrated openly. And that wraps up this edition of East Asia Tonight. Don't forget your headlines anytime at cna.asia. Thanks for watching.